Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Grid. I'm your host, Amelia Freeby, and on this show, we talk about how to share your work and make money online without relying on social media. If you're new around here, I would love to direct you to the Leaving Social Media Toolkit. This is our totally free resource that shares the 3 tools that I used to leave social media and start my business without it. You can find that linked in the show notes or at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. It's totally free and there to support you. And if you are a longtime listener, thank you so much for being here and tuning back into the show. We are currently making our way toward the season 6 finale. But before we get there, I am sneaking in a few standout guests that landed in my inbox this spring. To be perfectly honest, I was convinced the show was wrapping before the summer solstice. And then I kept getting these pitches I gut had to say yes to. So here we are, mid-July, and there's still more episodes to come. And I am thrilled about today's guest. So let me tell you all about her. Casey Johnston is a best-selling author, writer, and cultural critic. Her work covers the intersections of a diverse range of topics, including politics, identity, health, technology, power, womanhood, and embodiment. Casey has worked in media for 15 years as a senior tech, science, and health editor at The Outline, a senior health and tech editor at the New York Times Wirecutter, and as the culture editor at Technica. Most recently, she was the editorial director of health and lifestyle coverage at Vice. In 2016, Casey started a science-based column about strength called Ask a Swole Woman, which now lives within her newsletter, She's a Beast. Her newest book is called A Physical Education, and it's a journalistic exploration of the wide-ranging history, science, and psychology of strength, braided with her personal story of learning to lift weights. It was published in May 2025, and it is absolutely beautiful aesthetically and amazing in terms of the content and the writing, so I highly recommend getting a copy of your own. And as you've likely gathered from her bio, Casey's typical beat is health and science coverage. But today, we're going to have a conversation about her relationship to social media, both personally and professionally. We're going to talk about smartphones. We're going to talk about optimization. And I also think we'll talk a bit about how to be a journalist and a writer who has some mixed feelings about life online these days. So I can't wait to dive into all of that. Hi, Casey. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Hi, I'm so thrilled to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you. I'm so curious about the role that social media has played in your life personally and professionally, because really all of the outlets that you sort of came up through as an editor, I think of as super online, The Outline, Wirecutter. How did you become a journalist? How did you move through these roles? And what was your social media use like during that time, either on your personal accounts or did you have to use it for work? What did that look like?
Well, my social media use extends back even to college at this point. I started a Twitter account when I was still maybe a junior in college, something like that. So it's always been present throughout my professional life. And it's so interesting the way the relationship has changed. There's been so many back and forths about for instance, does the publication that employs you own your social media accounts? That was a conversation at one point. I personally have danced back and forth between my social media being an extension of my work plus also personal accounts. I haven't really either maintained a super firm boundary between those things or, a lot of journalists I think are super about their work on their social media and they have no personal element to it. I love to write jokes on Twitter or sort of commentary. That was my main social media bread and butter, I guess I might say. And then also jokey Instagram stories once that came around. But I'm always posting links to stories. I think my editors would actually get frustrated early on when I didn't post links to my stories enough. They were like, you never tweet your stories. And they were secretly mad about it for a while. I remember one editor turned out that like he wished that I did it more and was mad that I didn't. So I came up on social media in a certain way. Like when I used it, when I sort of built my career near it or around it, it was very different than it is now. Like I almost envision someone being like, well, how can you be against social media when you use social media to build up your professional profile? And I did like make all of these connections, and I would, you'd have a tweet go semi-viral, and then like an editor would DM you and be like, hey, would you write for my publication? And that was like where a lot of my opportunities came from. But that also was born of a confusion of like, if you can write a good tweet, you can write a good story, which is also rarely true. And I've made that mistake from both sides. I was like, sure, I could write a story, and then couldn't. And then I've hired people who I thought could write a story and they couldn't. And it's like, that's fine. They're totally different skills, but we didn't know how all of these things fit together. And I think that there was a time when it was a lot easier to extend social media into all of these other opportunities because the platforms in a way weren't so focused on entrapping people feels like a strong word, but they're very like, they try to keep people on the platforms as much as possible. And it feels like much more rare that any success on a platform extends into like the real world where you get a job or a opportunity out of it. And it just becomes like, oh, you get more sponsorship opportunities on the platforms. And then you're just more and more tied to the platforms. So that's a thing that's really, really changed in the last maybe 5 years. So I have a very different view of social media now than when I did when I first started working in this industry.
I think that makes so much sense. I really feel like social media and just like sharing and working online used to be much more connective and like interconnective. There was so much cross-platform engagement. There was this totally different relationship to sharing links on platforms. And now I think the platforms have each really turned into more of like a walled garden model where it's like, well, if you're inside those walls, like, yeah, you can make connections and do things. But, we've seen across Facebook, across X, across LinkedIn that like linking outside of the platform has now been deprioritized by the algorithms, and they make it harder and harder to leave, as you're saying. And also, I think there's an interesting correlation there between sort of where the platforms have gone, keeping people on them, and that thing you noticed even earlier in your career of like, oh yeah, writing a good tweet doesn't mean you can write a good story. And that the types of skills and success that are being practiced and modeled on each platform are not always transferable. They don't always actually yield any really like skill building or success beyond that space. And I think that's something I'm always thinking about or engaging with. And in some senses, it's true of any medium, right? Like being a good podcaster doesn't make me good on camera or something like that. But it still feels different, especially when you take the algorithms into account. Like learning to game an algorithm doesn't get you anywhere except maybe a few steps ahead with that algorithm. So before I go way off the deep end into my thoughts on algorithms, I have another question about your career in social media, because I heard you say that like when you were working as an editor, when you're writing for these publications online, they would maybe want you to put things on social media, have that expectation, different thoughts about that. Did your relationship to social media shift when you moved so much of your work onto your own newsletter and She's a Beast started to grow? And how much of your work ecosystem does your newsletter and your own publications take up now versus writing for other publications? And did that impact how you relate to social media?
So I think that when I started my newsletter, I was invested in its success. And because it was like the newsletter was maybe more, I hate to say it's not personal writing, more voicey writing. It was about my voice. It was almost kind of like trying to take what I put on social media for free and put it in this place where it's a little bit more cohesive. And that was kind of how I started really thinking about things, was like, I'm doing all of this like joking around commentary stuff on social media where it sort of just disappears for the most part, if not like gets further down the timeline just for reasons of you post it and it gets old. But I think it was when the formats of social media got more formalized. There was sort of more to them, and you weren't just sort of like throwing stuff out there, but it was like Instagram captions should be a certain way. The photos should look a certain way. The tweets should have like a certain cadence, or like certain types of jokes work really well on Twitter. They got quite professionalized to the point that it was like, oh, this is content that is almost deserving of more infrastructure around it. Like, we're throwing all this effort on trying to get success from the platform, when it's like, you could take that, and what you have when you take all of your tweets together, your Instagram posts together, is you have quite a professional product. That, in my case, like when I take photos and videos of myself lifting, and like my commentary around what it's like to lift, or what I think of like Kim Kardashian photoshopping her muscles, or these kinds of things that I would normally throw up on a Instagram story and be gone in 24 hours. I can take all that and put it into a newsletter. And it's like, that's almost like a edition of a magazine, as we, archaic term of magazine, you know? So I think I started to think about things more like that, where it was like, oh, you could flip this on its head at this point, and I would have something that I can make into my own thing.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting and like ahead of the curve realization that you had, that rather than feeling forced into the formal structures of your like journalistic industry background or the formal structures of the Instagram space, you realized that you could take the skills from both of those and move it into creating your own newsletter, which I believe you host on Ghost, so it's also on your own site. And you really then like went from essentially being a laborer in these two spaces, whether those be journalism or social media, and you kind of like elevated yourself and you became like the creator and owner of your own platform, and have been able to build something of your own there.
Yeah, totally. And I think you had asked me how much of my job is like writing for other places. The newsletter is kind of my central business at this point. I do a little bit of writing for other outlets. I'd like to do more now that I've gotten this book out, because let's say like the book is maybe like 30% of my time, the newsletter is 70% of the time that I put into work. So now I have more time that I would like to work on more books or work on more written pieces for other places. But yeah, it's my main thing. But this is why I love your podcast, is because you just summed up the philosophical thing that's going on. And I had not even really articulated what I just said before. But now I'm like, wow, how smart of me. No.
This is the show where everyone sounds their smartest. It's like my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. And I also been thinking so much lately, especially now that I've gotten more off of social media, like the formats and the what succeeds when the primary dynamic is basically engagement farming on all of these platforms is like, they're quite contrived. Like if you go off of social media for a while and you come back, it's like everyone's really like shoehorned into these really specific ways of even like cadence of their voice, and like the way that they cut the videos together, the order in which they reveal information. And I've even seen in my professional capacity as someone who uses and covers social media, like we had social media accounts attached to our formal work, like, you know, a TikTok account for this vertical at a publication or whatever. They would distribute documentation that would be like, here's how TikToks, like the sort of beat by beat of how a TikTok should be structured. It's like reveal a counterintuitive fact, and then like in 3 different steps, new facts attached to that fact, and sort of build your way back to the initial counterintuitive revelation. It's like there's so much more structure or contrivance behind what you see on social media than I think we might realize just viewing it. But once you go outside of it or spend a little more time off of it, you realize how hard everyone is working to sort of fit themselves into a mold of success on these platforms.
I think that engagement farming you mentioned really leads to this like memification all the way down on social media platforms. And so I think you do have a very few creators who are inventing formats, coming up with the jokes. But then you have, at this stage, literal millions of people following behind them, immediately picking up and copying and iterating. And in some spaces, and even sometimes on social media, that can feel fun and generative and interesting. But I think for the average user, by the time you're seeing the joke format, it's been done by so many people. It's been watered down to such a degree of sameness and flattening that, like, once you're outside of that space, you start to see, like, wow, there's truly just 10,000 people telling the same joke at the same time in my feed. And like, that's the whole thing.
I mean, this was a big part of the pressure. What became like sort of pressure being on social media was like subconscious, like not super intentional, but the thought process was there where it was like, I have to be online when something happens so that I see the jokes that are being made and I get my own joke out there. And I wasn't like trying to copy people's formats. It's like you want an original format, but you have to be kind of quick at it because if you don't get an original format out there on your own, someone else will, there will be so many, like you just have to be early with your joke because it might turn out to be not that original of a joke, or it's going to get lost in all of the other activity on there. And I think eventually I realized too that once I got off social media more, I had relied on the creative restraint. There's like a creative restraint around social media formats. And I was kind of like, I need that in order to be funny or to be creative or to do good work, that this is like helping me. And then once I got more off of it, I was like, oh, I'm funny and creative and write well without those restraints. And I had become so not dependent on them really, but they were a crutch for me that I worried that I would have kind of nothing if I didn't invest in those formats. And I needed to give myself space to experiment without them in order to realize, oh, I can do this without having to subscribe to all of these rules about what content should look like.
I love that. And I feel like it wraps in what I was trying to articulate earlier around the skill building as well. Because if your creativity is really based off of this sort of like reactivity to what's happening on social media, you don't really know if you've got it until you step outside of it, right? Like if you get off of social media and you actually realize, like, I don't know how to generate ideas or a joke or a story without just reacting to that. And of course, I think many of us, like, our creativity is a response or reaction to life, like to the things we're doing, to the things that we're seeing. And so I don't want to inherently say like it's bad to be funny reactively or like it's bad to be funny in response to stuff. Of course, every joke is in response to things. But I think where it gets dangerous on social media, which you were pointing to as well, is then it becomes this pressure cooker of I have to be online all the time. So I catch the joke format early enough that I'm on it before it becomes like cliche and out of date and nobody cares anymore. So I keep growing my platform such that maybe I finally have enough people paying attention to me that I can have an original joke land and I can start the trend, right? Like it really does feed all of these other cycles when we are only practicing our creativity in that space.
Mm-hmm. And on that schedule too, it's like you're just at the mercy of the constant waves of events, and like, where are you going to get a foot in the door of each of these happenings in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. As we've been unpacking all of this, like the path of your career from an editor to now working primarily on your own publication, and you sort of alluded to it, but just to make more specific, like your shift from being a journalist who writes about tech, smartphones, different types of health and science coverage, to now really focusing your platform on lifting, which is the subject of your book. And of course, that's not all you talk about, but I think like it has much more specificity than perhaps your work previously did. It has me thinking about the difference between a beat and a brand. Because I think that journalists have like a beat, like you have these sorts of like verticals, like things you talk about, the types of things you pitch out on, but there might be quite a bit of variety. Like one journalist might be pitching a piece about smartphones and also a piece about lifting, like just to use yourself as an example. But when you have a personal brand, I find there is a lot more pressure to not stray from your like 3 content pillars or things like that. And it becomes about you as the person. Whereas I think often with like a journalistic beat, that can be embedded in the publications as much as it is in what you're doing. So When I lay all of that out that way, as me, the outsider, who is not a journalist and does have a personal brand, but only in my own business way, I'm curious what you think about it. Like, do you think that tracks, like, the difference between a beat and a brand? Has that been your experience? Do you think Ask a Swole Woman, Casey Johnston, is a brand now? Or do you reject that? I'm so curious your thoughts.
It's interesting that I never really thought about how do beats and brands fit together or speak to each other, because beats were brands for journalists in a way before there were brands for journalists. Think of a beat as like subject matter expertise, kind of. And I've gotten some questions around this in the process of doing interviews about my book, where sometimes people just ask me, like, how have you been writing about the same topic for so long? And it's like, it's a bit of a strange question, because we've had in the history of the world, before people used to have to change jobs every 18 months, we had people who had journalistic beats for like 40 years. You'd be like a labor reporter. And I think the key of that is looking at your subject area as more of a lens than as like a set of maybe answers, is how we think of a lot of content now, where it's like, what's the answer to these questions, rather than what does this subject have to offer in terms of how we see the world, or in the case of like a lot of health stuff, how we see ourselves, how we see other people, how we see our daily sort of in and out tasks like eating food or moving our bodies or experiencing stress in a physical way. And that changes all of the time. So it's like, as those things change, there's always more to say. So I don't think of things so much in a brand sense. I think, have you ever read No Logo by Naomi Klein? I'm just reading it now, and it's kind of fun because it's almost quaint what the issues were with marketing and branding in businesses at that time. But she talks a lot about, like, there was this turning point of branding where businesses became not about products. Like Nike was not about shoes. Nike was about success in sports and like victory and being cool, or like you could ascribe a number of things to it, but it has this sort of ideological profile that has less to do with what the objects are that they make. It used to be about objects. We are X company and we make boats, or we make water bottles, or we make shoes. And now there's all this ideology attached to it. So I think you could easily describe my newsletter and my set of books as like, I have a certain set of values that unite what I do, but I relate much more maybe to the idea of a beat versus a brand. And I like the way that shapes my relationship to the subject matter and to the results, and like maybe how it makes people feel, where it's like, I want it sort of to be a window opening out versus like, let me bring you in and like, I have all of the solutions. I don't want to be necessarily the solutions guy. I'm like, I want to teach you to fish, so to speak. I don't want to be giving you the fish. I don't want to be responsible for the fish, you know?
Yeah, okay. This latter part is so interesting to me, because I also now feel like we've brought in a third thing of like a beat, a brand, or a business. Because I would say personally, like, I would locate the actual solution being sold in the business. Like, if it's for money, if it's a transaction that you're making to like, give me your money and I give you the solution, to me, that's where brands move into their business model. But I hear you on pulling from No Logo, the idea that like, the brand now becomes this ideological profile. And I think that tracks a lot of what I'm seeing in the shift from beat to brand as journalists are leaving publications and starting their own newsletters. I think some of the ones that are the most financially successful have branded themselves very clearly ideologically. And that has allowed them to sell something, like to sell that ideology and turn it into their business. I mean, we're seeing this on Substack all the time in some highly problematic ways, and other ways I find less problematic. So I'm not like saying this is a good thing by any means. I'm just trying to sort of chart this course. But I also feel your like hesitance and the sort of like, there's some care to be had with how we move between these categories.
The Substack conversation is very interesting because I do feel like there's tons of people who are hopping on there where the sort of overall pitch of their publication is like, if you're interested in quote unquote what I do with no further specificity or elaboration, they're just like, whatever piques my mind, I'm gonna like throw up on my Substack. And sometimes that does get initial rush of subscribers. It's interesting because when it's not super specific or you don't have a real remit beyond whatever it is that this person finds interesting, that becomes really hard to execute on. So you can have these sort of like value-oriented words, but that's maybe a tough way to guide a publication. I'm thinking of certain, like every single MSNBC host is now on Substack, and they all have tons of followers now, but I wonder how this is going to play out subject matter-wise or perspective-wise.
Maybe my brief summary of what's coming up is like, I think having a beat is about being really good at asking questions. This is my favorite thing about journalists. They're so good at asking questions and seeing things from so many different angles. And I think the philosopher in me relates to that. I am not a journalist. In fact, I've tried to write for a few publications and I'm quite bad at it. It's not my skill at all. But I think a beat is about asking really good questions from a variety of perspectives. I think perhaps a brand is about telling people the answers to their questions.
Very
and
interesting.
A business is about selling the answers to those questions. That is maybe how like I would sum up what I was trying to figure out with you among these three things.
I think that's a great way of relating all three of those things. Yeah.
I did not arrive here intending to talk about that at all, but it's what started to come up as I was
This is
thinking.
the magic of Off the Grid.
Hi there, Off the Grid listeners. Amelia here, interrupting today's episode because I want to tell you about a book. Now, this is not just any book. It is a business book, and it is the business book that has been my companion from my very first year in business to my first 5-figure month to the present moment where I'm thinking about how to scale back certain areas of my business so that I can grow others. That book is Free Time: Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business by Jenny Blake. In the book, Jenny charts her own journey from working a full-time job to starting a business that took over her life to developing the systems that allowed her to grow beyond her wildest dreams without getting burned out, bored, bottlenecked, or buried by bureaucracy in her business. Jenny's guiding question is, how can we earn twice as much in half the time with joy and ease while serving the highest good? And in the book, she teaches a 3-part framework that will help you align, design, and assign everything that needs to get done in your business based on your values, your energy, your strengths, and what you actually want from your work. Oliver Burkeman, author of the global bestseller 4,000 Weeks, says this about the book: Free time is a revelation, a detailed roadmap for building a business that fulfills you and serves the world, leaving anxiety and burnout behind. Jenny Blake's advice is grounded and inspiring and always connected to life as it is actually lived at the human scale. If you've ever hit a moment in your business where you just wanted to burn it all down, you are not alone, and this book can help. You can head to the show notes for the link to learn more, or just go to itsfreetime.com/book. That's itsfreetime.com/book. Thanks to Jenny for sponsoring this episode, and thanks to you for listening. I truly hope you'll go pick up a copy of Free Time so that you and I can chit-chat about it in the future. For now, let's get back to this episode. I would love to hear more about what you've called your like DIY dumb phone method. And I'm so curious. So if folks are listening and you're like, what is a dumb phone? We're just saying this is sort of colloquialism to distinguish it from a smartphone. So a smartphone versus a quote unquote dumb phone. But Casey, could you tell us about like what was your DIY dumb phone method? Why did you do this experiment? And like how did it go?
I've always had a relationship with social media where I'm kind of like, I think this is too much. I was a bit defensive of it, where I was like, all of my successes come from here. Like, maybe it's bad in a lot of ways, but it's benefited me in all these ways too. So, and also I have fun, love reading jokes, all this stuff. But then I think your podcast and your toolkit presented this vision for me of like, oh, I think I've lost sight of like how anything can exist apart from social media. And that feels kind of crazy that it is now the whole pie to someone like me, where you would never think about other ways of reaching people or relating to people or getting information out into the world other than social media platforms. And that felt kind of wild, especially as it felt like more and more control was being taken away from me as a content creator by the algorithms. And it felt more and more like I had to fit myself into these boxes in order to like hope for any kind of success. And it was still it was like Russian roulette. So that made me think I need to change my relationship to this stuff. I'd read tons of articles about people trying to swap their smartphone out for a dumb phone, like an old flip phone. And the most common pitfalls that come up in almost every single such article are that it would fully break any like group texting situation that they had, even sort of regular text. You'd be back to texting with like a, T9 texting. There was texting and then there was maps. Mapping, getting around directions. If the phone did not have that, some flip phones do now. They have like a color screen and a mapping feature. But if you try to go back really all the way back, they have nothing. And then people are just lost. You're back to like, again, the olden days of you would go on mapquest.com and you would get directions and you would write them down on a piece of paper. Or like if you were at your friend's house, their mom would like draw you a map of like, here's our house, here's the highway, here's how you get back. You're like right here, left here, Those were the two big things that sort of messed everyone up. So I thought, what if I just take the interim step here was actually like I got a bunch of my old phones. I have my old iPhone 4S still. And I was like, hey, this is so tiny and amazing. I love this. Like, I hate my giant phone. I love how small the 4S was. It was just a perfect object. And I had it and I was like, oh, I think I can get by here with texting, maps, maybe a couple other things like the camera, and maybe not much else. Like, what do I really need my phone for? I've downloaded so many apps. I had never deleted an app before fairly recently, so I just had this like wasteland of apps in my phone. And I was like, what if I kept those two essential functions and a few other things and just got rid of everything else, especially anything that's distracting, any social media apps. So I backed up my phone, wiped my phone, reinstalled only the apps that I felt like fit my new vision for how I would use my phone. So like I have a couple of reading apps. I have Kindle and Libby. I have a note-taking app, Notion, camera, maps, etc. And I deleted or moved off a bunch of the default apps, turned notifications off for everything. I don't think I even have Siri set up. And I was like, let's just see how this works. And it was great. At first, it was a little tough. I would like always be pulling out my phone if I was like standing in the grocery line or whatever, and then being like, oh, there's nothing to do on here. And now I just have to stand here. And that felt like the most awkward thing in the entire world. Like if you go to an airport or a grocery store or whatever, and you look around, it's like everyone is on their phone, staring at their phone. If you are sitting at a bar waiting for your drink or food or whatever, and you're not on your phone, you're like an alien now. And that was how I felt. But I hated that I felt that. I was like, why should we feel bad just for sitting there doing nothing or feel like it's so weird? So I wanted to just try that, I think, to mix it up, I guess. It maybe is that it's just enough of a change from how things used to be that it's still sort of novel. But now it's been about a year and a half since I did this. It was like January 2024 that I wiped my phone and went forward from there. And it's been amazing. I mean, it broke my relationship to sort of broke off all of the attachments that I had to scrolling feeds. Like I had already kind of stopped posting, but it was still just like the thing that I did if I had any free time would be to just like whip out my phone and open a bunch of different apps. And I even had a joke in the piece that I wrote about this where it was like, I would get out my phone just to do something as simple as like check what time it was. And then I would see I had a notification on Instagram. And then I would go on Instagram, scroll 20 minutes on there. And then I would open Twitter and scroll 20 minutes on there. And then I would lock my phone and be like, what was I doing? Oh, yeah, I was checking the time. And then I would open my phone and check the time. There would be another notification. It would just start all over again. So this is like a lot of my life. And this helped break that relationship. And part of what I did was I took another old phone that I had and I was like, this is my social media phone. If I need to post on social media for some work-related reason or check something, I have this other phone that lives plugged in. It has no SIM. It can only work on Wi-Fi. And if I need to like get on Instagram for something, I can do it on that phone. And that helped stop me from downloading it on my regular phone, knowing that I had it in this place and I just have to go to this one place and use it there if I need it. And then what ended up happening is that I never really needed to use it, or that was like enough friction that I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to look at this. I don't want to communicate with anyone on there. I have no need of posting. It's just like, it's, gone now.
I really appreciate, one, this experiment in general, and two, that you DIY'd it, because I see quite a few devices being sold as this sort of phone without social media. I think there's the light phone. They have a bunch of different names. Many of them are in, black and white so that they are theoretically less addictive or attractive to be on all the time. But I think that so many of us, like you, have an iPhone sitting somewhere in our house that's not active or not connected to a phone plan, but we never managed to properly recycle. And if you still want to engage in social media in some way, but have scrolling be a much smaller or extinct part of your life, you can really sort of like DIY your own device, which is where you engage with those platforms, doesn't leave your house, doesn't leave Wi-Fi, etc. And then your phone could become something else for you. And I also think from my own experience, what I learned when I got off of social media is I absolutely was like seeking scrolling elsewhere. When I got off of social media, I just started scrolling my email inbox like a million times a day. Or I think my friend Nick Antoinette always talks about like deleting Instagram and then checking the weather app obsessively and like refreshing the weather. Just like every second the weather could be different. Who knows? But it is that behavioral piece that you really can, for many of us, like we really see come out when we step away. And I just really appreciated how you did this experiment and then how it has become like your sort of new way of relating to your phone.
Yeah. I realized that I was kind of looking to scrolling as like giving me something to do, not in the sense of like the actual task of it, but like if I was feeling like maybe even there was something that I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't want to do it. If I open up Instagram and there's like a DM to answer or like a bunch of posts to look at, it's like the not literal thought I'm having, but the thing that's happening is that I'm like, oh, I gotta see all of these posts that I haven't seen before I can sort of move on to this other thing. I think I realized that my relationship to my phone was just, I had no real like say in what my phone was doing for me. It was like, this was originally a tool that was supposed to like help me with things. Like it was supposed to make stuff easier, but now it's just like inserted itself in all of these ways that I don't need it to. And it's made all of the stuff that I actually need it for more difficult because of all of the things that have intervened in between there. It's like, I do need it to figure out where I'm going. I do need it to like tell my husband I'm going to be late. I need it to take a picture, but I don't need it to tell me that everyone's posting about something on Twitter. That was never what I wanted my phone to be doing. And now it's doing all of this stuff that I never wanted it to be doing. And it's like, can I get back to the version of this where it's helping me and I'm not trying to serve it in all of these ways, I guess.
I think that over the past decade, many, if not most of us, have like handed our agency to our phones. through a lot of like covert training that our phones were doing. I'm not saying we like woke up one day and we're like, yeah, I'll just give this away. But like it just happened over time. It really accumulated. And this is something that I've been writing about in my book. Like the second chapter is about algorithms. And the thought I'm trying to trace there is that algorithms are designed to solve a problem. Like that's what any algorithm does. It solves a problem with a certain set of information and a sequence of steps that it's trained to do and things it's trained to prioritize. But on social media, many of the platforms started by solving a problem for us, whether it was social network like Facebook or, recommending products like Pinterest. There was a sort of discrete problem the algorithm was created to solve. But then what has happened over time is that I think our behavior has shifted. And most of us now, like when we go to these platforms, we don't have a problem in mind most of the time, or that problem perhaps is boredom, which is a different type of problem. And then we also like let the apps tell us, we let the algorithms tell us what our problems are. So they invent new problems for us all the time that we would never have if we weren't on social media to begin with. And there's a sort of like tongue-in-cheek section of the second chapter in my book where I went through my email inbox and was like, what is all of the shit that I bought because social media told me I needed it? And it's like hilarious stuff, like an ice roller for my face. I have no need for an ice roller for my face. Like so much exercise clothing for movement practices I don't even do. Like so many things that I purchased because I was presented with this problem by social media. The algorithm served this problem up to me because similar people also bought things to solve this problem. And then now, instead of checking out what my friend's baby looks like, which is maybe what I got on there to do years ago, I suddenly bought something for a problem I didn't have. So I just think that there has been this real obfuscation of the problem that really has shaped our relationships to our phones. But on a deeper level, it's reshaped our relationship to our own agency and our ability to identify and solve our problems, which is why we're seeing like these like real core issues coming up in people's social media use.
Yes, that is 100% it. I mean, that's what advertising has always done, is to be like, hey, did you know you're unhappy in this specific way? Well, here's how this product or brand or whatever is going to fix you. And I mean, it's also like a fomenting of insecurity too, where it's like, not only are you unhappy, you didn't even realize how unhappy you are. And you're like, oh no, what if that's the key to everything, is this way that I didn't realize that I was unhappy?
Yeah. And that's what Jaron Lanier writes about in 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. He basically talks about how by being on social media, we are consenting to hyper-personalized advertising every second that we're on the platforms. So it's no longer just this sort of like mass market advertising that we see all over our lives. But in fact, like on the apps, we have this degree of personalization that was like never before seen, and how that's shaping things. And we're seeing it now. I mean, even the spaces that were like seemingly sacred from advertising, like WhatsApp, is now getting ads. So in people's WhatsApp, there was going to be ads now. I just saw this announced recently as we're recording this. So, we're really going to start seeing that in every area of our online lives, I think. And it's going to require those of us who are critical thinkers and who care about our agency to become more skilled at shifting our behavior online, or choose different ways of relating to these tools, or exit them entirely. Like there are different tactics among it, but like that's the sea we're all swimming in.
The amount of ads that I don't see anymore, because everyone puts all of their energy into advertising on social media. If you go off of social media, you're just like free. You don't see ads anymore. It's incredible. Like that was an effect that I felt pretty quickly, where I was like, this is amazing. I don't feel like I'm seeing products all of the time and fretting about whether I should buy them,
I think that many of us underestimate how much brain space and energy that takes up to be like, am I going to buy the Girlfriend Collective leggings while they're still on sale? That was like so much of what I thought about.
A thing that I say now too is like, while I was definitely the person like defending social media and like, sure, it's got its problems, but it's also fun and there's professional opportunity, etc. But I had never tried living the other way, You have to try both, I think, in order to be able to speak to both. And now that I've tried both, I could never go back to the way things were before. This is definitely the better way. And I didn't realize how much energy and brain space and all of that was being taken up by all the stuff that I didn't need to be even worrying about.
I feel like we have had such an interesting and wide-ranging conversation. And in fact, talked about a lot of things that were not even on my list for us today, which I'm thrilled about. Feeling so inspired by everything that we've unpacked and uncovered. Also feeling inspired by your book and honestly also just by the model of what you're doing. I really want to encourage listeners to both buy a physical education, buy Liftoff, your other book, to see totally different models of publishing that you've done, Casey. Also, go to your website and explore how you've built She's a Beast, because the business model you've set up and the way that you're operating as an independent journalist is just really interesting and inspiring to me. So would you like to tell listeners how to find all those things I just mentioned before we send them off?
For sure. So yes, I have my book that just came out, A Physical Education, which is available from Hachette, but also wherever you buy your books, local bookseller, library, Barnes & Noble, bookshop, all the good places. I have a self-published book, Liftoff, Couch to Barbell, you may find at couchtobarbell.com. It's the sort of practical complement to the storytelling of A Physical Education about how do brains and bodies work in relation to trauma, relationships, all of these things, and how can that be augmented by the physical practice of exercise and especially lifting weights. And then Couch to Barbell is okay, now you've read A Physical Education, you want to get into lifting weights, Liftoff is there for you in that event. And then my newsletter is She's a Beast at she'sabeast.co. And there's a free newsletter that comes out every Thursday. There's a paid newsletter there's an additional 2 Sunday installments. And I'm on Blue Sky, Casey Johnston. That's my only real social media relationship.
Thank you so much, Casey, for having this conversation with me today. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to both the sort of philosophical, critical aspects of the conversation, but also those practical tidbits Casey gave us. I will link to the DIY dumb phone post in the show notes if you are interested in trying that out for yourself. Until next time, we will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone